Well, we may think that growing old is inevitable. What if aging were just a disease that could be treated? That's the mindset and approach of anti-aging specialists. Today, Dr. Brian Boxer Wachler is here. He's founder of the Institute of Optimal Health in Beverly Hills. He's also one of the world's leading surgeons for vision correction. Pleasure to have you back again today, Dr. Boxer Wachler.
Thank you, Greg.
It's been a few years, but actually I interviewed you last time right after you did my laser vision surgery. But I can tell, though, that anti-aging is becoming a lot more mainstream these days because, well, I'm just hearing about it more all the time. And you, who I think of as my world-class eye surgeon, is now involved in anti-aging. What's going on in the field?
Well, it's a really exciting area because even though I'm an ophthalmologist, but before that, I was a medical doctor. Right? Everyone has to start at that base. So what I learned when we were doing vision correction procedures, like LASIK, for example, and we would correct patients' vision, most LASIK surgeons just pretty much say, okay, great, you've got perfect vision, bye, have a nice life. Well, my philosophy was a little different. I was really interested in, well, we corrected your vision now, but what can we do to help you maintain your eyesight as you get older? Because your eyes are going to age just like everything else.
Because they say eventually you may need to have it done again anyway. And even though so far I haven't had any problems and don't need it done again, but so you want to maintain that over the life as much as possible.
Exactly, exactly. And if that occurs, it's not because LASIK wore off, it's because the eye aged, just like any other part of the body. So I started researching and understanding a lot of the areas with the eyes to try to optimize the health for eyes. And from there, naturally, there's an application to the whole body too, with understanding why the body ages and what can be done to help intervene with that process. And
this actually was something that affected you personally.
Right. I actually, when I was in college, and even in high school, I was a competitive athlete. And in college, I used to run the crew team at UCLA. And then I was fortunate I had a scholarship to go to Scotland and Edinburgh, and I rode on the crew team at the University of Edinburgh. And it was a great experience. We raced at Henley, the Henley Royal Regatta.
It must be great exercise too.
Yeah, I was in the best shape of my life. And then afterwards, the studies, the training, the medical training and all that, obviously I didn't exercise as much. But at the same time, something very unfair happened to me. I started gaining weight. And I was still doing my routine. I was still eating the same, but it just got thicker. And it was a little bit disconcerting. So also in concert with what I was learning on the optimal eye side of preventative health care, I started also then looking at, how do I apply this to the body, and looking at myself as an example initially, because I had my own interest originally from that point of view too.
By the way, I think we have some photos of you too. We have, let me see, make sure I put it in the right order here. We have the before you, the collegiate rower you, right? They're your leaner years. And then we also have the thicker you, as you would say.
The more of me.
More to love, as they say, right? That's the politically correct term, I guess. Now we have the post you, by the way. Or as I said before, the after you.
Right.
So how did you go from the more of you to love to the thinner you?
The more fit me now?
The more fit you.
Well, basically, what I started doing was looking at why was this occurring to me? It seemed very unfair. I'd been fit my whole life and nothing changed. I was just gaining weight, thicker everywhere. So I started realizing that hormones, the body's own natural hormones, they're secreted by glands. They're only programmed to be optimal for a certain number of years, and afterwards it starts going south.
And that's usually, what are the optimal years?
The optimal years are when people are in their 20s.
20s. And that's for men and women?
For men and women.
Okay. So after 20s, it's downhill from there?
Unfortunately, from a hormone point of view, yes.
Okay. Other things may get better, but at least the hormones are going up.
Yeah, the hormones are on their way out. It's almost like the body was programmed to do all of its best performance, reproductive-wise, everything-wise, in their 20s, and afterwards the body's programmed just to be, see you later.
Oh.
So
better do it while you can, I guess. I don't know.
Well, but it was fascinating to learn that there's so much research, peer-reviewed, published research on the effects of hormones, and then also replacing and rebalancing hormones up to natural levels of somebody who's in their 20s. And it dramatically affects how somebody feels, how they look, their quality of life.
And that's what you did. You take the hormones to get back to the years that you wanted to be at.
Right. So I myself was my first patient, actually. And after that, I treated my family. And after that, I started treating my own patients. And then I became board certified in this area called anti-aging medicine, which is a specialty in and of itself of anti-aging, or what I like to consider as more optimal health or preventative health.
Now, how long has that field been recognized? Because it is a newer specialty, right? I mean, this is not something that, you know, there's always been geriatrics, as we were saying beforehand, but this is different because it's preventative. It's not, again, just to speak loosely, it's not waiting until things fall off or stop working. You're trying to prevent, you know, which is roughly speaking more the approach of geriatrics, I guess, but this is more preventative.
Right. I would say the field really started probably around 20 years ago, but it's very small. At the time, mainstream medicine looked at it as being very renegade, and then it started gaining credibility slowly because of the studies being done, being published in the mainstream journals. And then they started with the credentialing process, you know, very organized, just like in any other field. Like I'm an ophthalmologist by training originally. Board certification in ophthalmology.
Well, that's why, you know, honestly, I mean, I hear from publicists, books people pitch me, or I read the articles in the papers, but I didn't know if it was more of a new age kind of thing. But then when you were involved, I thought, well, I mean, I know you, I mean, one of the best, well, I mean, world class in laser eye surgery, or just the whole vision correction, it just doesn't get any better. And so when you were involved, I mean, that's when I knew that something was really going on, that someone with your credentials and not just anybody on the street was involved in this.
And it attracted me because, number one, it's science-based, and it really makes a difference. It really helps patients when they're feeling like out of control in their life, with low energy, for example, weight gain. Women, I mean, the classic is PMS. This is solely because of hormones, PMS. And PMS can be so bad for some women that it's a good thing they don't carry revolvers or guns, because, you know, there'd be nobody standing, from what I'm told, from some of my patients until we get them rebalanced.
But you said, though, the interesting thing that I thought was that also that it's the men, there's a male equivalent of menopause, from what you said, roughly.
Right. The male equivalent is called andropause.
Andropause.
And it's largely due to loss of testosterone. When you think of testosterone like the classic, you know, bodybuilder sense, you know, being really big muscles, but the reality is that having a youthful level of testosterone is key for men and for women too. Obviously, women don't need as much testosterone than men, but it's extremely important for both genders in terms of reducing the risk of osteoporosis, reducing excess fat that builds up naturally, and increasing muscle mass and memory, reducing the risk of Alzheimer's. So there's a lot of benefits even to testosterone, especially for men and women too.
And what sort of treatment do you do then for post-menopausal women? Is it what treatment or what hormones do you use for that treatment? Well,
we always will look at assessing the hormones. So we do blood testing initially, and we look at what all the hormones are. And when I say all the hormones, we're really looking at, for women, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, thyroid, DHEA. Those are really the biggies. Melatonin as well is important for sleep. And so for postmenopausal women, what we're going to find is, particularly because of the hot flashes, they're going to be low in estrogen, they're going to be low in progesterone. They'll actually probably be low in all of those, but that's our starting point. And once we start replacing, or what we consider rebalancing the hormones, then we do follow-up testing afterwards to verify that we're back in the range of somebody who's in their 20s, and the symptoms really correlate with that nicely.
We'll be right back. And we are back with Dr. Brian Boxer Wachler today, talking about anti-aging and preventative medicine. You had mentioned estrogen before the break. There was a controversy in the media about that, about prescribing estrogen recently. What was your take on that?
Well, there's actually two types of estrogens. And a matter of fact, there's two types of hormones that are being prescribed right now and for many years. One are the synthetics, which are not identical to the body's hormones. They're slightly altered. Pharmaceutical companies are what make them and profit from them, and they're patented. The other type of hormone is called bioidentical. Those are the natural hormones. They actually have the same identical structure to the body's own hormone. Those are made and dispensed by compounding pharmacies. So when the estrogen controversy and scare, quite frankly, came out in the mainstream media a year or two ago, it was over the synthetic estrogen and synthetic progesterone. which were linked to some pretty serious side effects. And the synthetic,
such as?
Well, probably the worst is synthetic progesterone associated with increased risk of breast cancer. And the estrogen a lot of times is prescribed alongside of it. So now we had a lot of hysteria out there of doctors taking patients off of estrogen and progesterone. But what was really a disservice was the distinction in the mainstream was not made that it was the synthetic versions, the bioidentical or the natural estrogen, progesterone, don't have these cancer and other types of side effects.
Now, when you mentioned compound pharmacies, those are, how are those created? Is it something like, for instance, I read that if you, are you combining other medicines, or is it, for instance, I heard if you crush a pill, that could be an example, or something. If you're using it in a form that it's normally prescribed in, something like that, or is that roughly speaking what you're talking, or what are compound pharmacies in a little more detail?
Well, you have the major retail pharmacies that we're all familiar with that are in strip malls all over the place.
Sure.
They just dispense primarily just pharmaceutical drugs that are prescription. The compounding pharmacy, these are pharmacists that have the ability to customize compounds of drugs.
Okay.
And so what they do is they're able to formulate the customized bioidentical hormones, for example.
Okay.
So it's a different type. It's like the personalization or the customization of drugs. And they can do lots of different formulations, not just for hormones, but the other drugs that we think of that come from the major retailers.
Because there's not one drug out there for every specific. I mean, it's actually fairly common to make some kind of adjustment because
in compounding pharmacies, that's what they specialize in.
But now that there's a controversy over that, or I think you said that there could have been an agenda that maybe the pharmaceutical companies had a business interest in.
Well, like anything in America, you always have to follow the money, right? So pharmaceutical companies are very big, powerful, public companies, a lot of pressure on them to keep up their profits.
Right.
So what we were seeing was that because of the estrogen, progesterone scare from some, I'm not going to say any mainstream names, but people I'm sure can imagine which brands those were. Doctors started switching from those brands to the bioidentical ones. And so they were losing, the pharmaceutical companies were losing market share, and they started lobbying the FDA to start regulating and clamping down on the compounding pharmacies.
And their argument was that the compound pharmacies are unregulated, or they can do, they have too much, they're self-regulated?
They are self-regulated. They have their own self-regulation policy and standards that they hold themselves up to. But they were, the pharmaceutical companies were lobbying the FDA very hard. And there was a big backlash from doctors, patients, to not do this and not basically shut down the compounding pharmacy field.
And has that been successful, or where does it stand right now?
I think that's quieted down. I think there was so much pushback from basically the ability to practice free medicine for doctors and patients that use these pharmacies that I think it's quieted down now.
And you are more on the compound pharmacy side, or more for the, I'm going to say the
Pharmaceutical?
Right.
Well,
meaning, yeah, that you're the natural, if you will, not the synthetic type of.
Well, for hormones.
Or bioidentical.
Yeah, for hormones, definitely I only use bioidentical ones that come from compounding pharmacies. There are certainly some other areas in medicine or even in ophthalmology where I will use the pharmaceutical brands for antibiotics, for example. I mean, those are lifesavers, or people have eye infections for some reason. I mean, you can't get by without the antibiotics, which are pharmaceutical. Okay. But for hormones, it's definitely the bioidentical route for me.
And so what others? So you have estrogen and
progesterone.
Right.
And then also for both men and women, thyroid. Thyroid's very important. And again,
I believe you did something for your father in that regard, right?
My father had been kind of the typical, he's in his 70s, and he'd been a little bit of a curmudgeon and resistant to this whole concept. His primary care doctor for years had told him, oh, you don't need to be on that, you don't need to be on that. And also with testosterone too, we checked his levels, and so finally I gave him some peer-reviewed published studies to take to his doctor, and I talked to his doctor and finally kind of warmed up and said, yeah, I think maybe it's okay to try it. So we finally started the testosterone and the thyroid, and he became like a new person, jovial, lively, comedic. And
So you really do see a lot of psychological effects and benefits besides just the purely physical.
oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, because it's also a well-being improvement. You know, people feel just better about themselves and about those around them. And a lot of times depression is secondary to low hormones. So it's very frequent that in the United States, doctors are writing prescriptions for antidepressants as if they're giving out candy to kids. And a lot of these patients really just have hormone deficiencies or imbalances. And we're even starting to see some psychiatrists who are really up to speed on the hormone role with psychiatry and mood, prescribing hormones and doing this analysis instead of antidepressants.
So how do you know if you have a problem, or what signs should you look for? Or really, I mean, does everybody have a problem once you get into, what, 40s for guys or something? I mean, you know, what is it, how widespread is it, and what should you be looking out for?
Well, I think one thing if people want to do is on our website we have a questionnaire survey, and it's a series of questions based on symptoms, and at the end it scores it, and it gives patients an idea what type of hormone deficit they may have. That's that's kind of a
so some people may have more problem with one thing than another.
Exactly, exactly. But right now, if people wanted to go look in the mirror after the show and get an idea if they have a hormone problem, one thing that would be easy to do is if you notice that your hair is kind of dry and sparse and you're losing your hair a little bit, it's becoming thinner, that's probably thyroid.
Thyroid.
That can be low thyroid that can account for hair, or even loss of the outer 1/3 of the eyebrows.
Really?
That's also typically thyroid.
And so you actually, if someone takes the hormones, thyroid hormone, then their hair grows back? Or you see fuller hair in people, you actually have those kind of results? Or
the hair won't necessarily come back, but the thinness of it, it'll get thicker. And it'll slow down or help prevent it from continuing to thin out and be lost. Of course, there's other reasons for hair loss too, which have to do with another hormone, but thyroid is certainly a big one.
And are there other things to look out for as well?
Well, sure. Again, if someone's looking in the mirror and they start to see that they have dark circles under their eyes, that is possibly a low cortisol level from the adrenal glands. And another sign is men, if they have what some people quite frankly call man boobs, that's really too little testosterone and too much estrogen.
Really?
So there's an imbalance even in men where they have too much estrogen, and that increases.
Now, is that also, I mean, do you have to be overweight to have that, or are you saying that, I mean, is that, part of a weight issue too, or is it like skinny guys can have that?
Well, usually it's going to be associated with other weight that's been gained, the thickening process everywhere, basically. But the man boobs, is, so to speak, is typically from the estrogen excess.
So, but the guys do have estrogen too.
Guys have to have some estrogen, but you don't want to have too much. Of course, there's other things people do that increase their estrogen just by doing what they're doing, like people who drink a lot of alcohol.
Really?
That increases estrogen conversion out of testosterone.
I never heard. So drinking a beer is supposed to be the manly man thing to do, but you're telling me that it creates more...
If you drink too much, then you won't be so much looking like a man anymore.
You won't see that in the beer commercial anytime soon. Have a bud.
Yeah, but alcohol it's actually known in the medical community that excess alcohol, men develop the excess.
So it's not just the beer belly; it's actually the
beer boobs.
Okay.
Yes. But it's all reversible. But fortunately, it's all reversible, and that's the key, is that people don't have to feel that they're just out of control on this spiral going down, that they can actually do something about it and actually turn it around.
What kind of a treatment are we talking? This is lifelong then, and how often and how much, and or is it just all over the place depending on the person?
Well, it depends. It depends on what we're replacing or rebalancing. And long term, if people want to enjoy the benefits for the rest of their life and just improve the quality of their life, it could be a lifelong regimen for people. And usually people are pretty motivated because they've seen the improvements. They feel younger, they have more energy, they're looking like they were when they were younger. So there's a good feedback for patients to continue with doing that.
Now, you mentioned earlier some of the possible side effects, or what people thought might be side effects from estrogen. Are there any other side effects, possible side effects to this, though, or is it too new that we don't know, or?
Great question. Actually, all these hormones have been very well researched. So side effects from the bioidentical hormones are usually related to somebody whose level is really too high. And so that's why the follow-up testing to check the hormone levels in the body is really important. Because if somebody was just taking estrogen, for example, their doctor gave them a prescription for estrogen and they're not getting the level checked, if the estrogen level is too high, they may actually start taking on some of the symptoms of when they're having a period, like they're bloating, they feel moody. You know, for women, they can get breast tenderness and soreness, engorgement of the breasts, fibrocystic disease. That fibrocystic disease is typically estrogen dominance or overdose. So again, if the levels are right, we're really not going to run into the problems with the overdose. But again, unfortunately, it's all reversible by bringing the level back down.
Bring the level down. We'll be right back. And we are back with Dr. Boxer Wachler today talking about anti-aging medicine. Well, I thought maybe in our last few minutes we could kind of do a rundown of what, again, all the major kinds of hormone replacement are and things that people should look out for them.
Sure, I can give you a little overview of the different hormones and what the physical signs would be and what the actual symptoms would be.
Okay.
So, for example, if we look at testosterone for both men and women, lack of testosterone is going to be reflected by increasing weight, increasing fat mass, reduced muscle mass, reduced libido. Low estrogen, low testosterone equals low sex drive. So by replacing that, obviously you're going to reverse that. People are going to be more interested if they have a partner, in their partner, and having.
So you don't need Viagra, it's just testosterone.
You actually, yeah, you really don't if you're maximized and optimized on your testosterone. And so, you know, obviously increasing muscle mass back, reducing that fat mass, getting, you know, fitting back into clothes that you wish you were able to go back into.
Yep.
Those are all the benefits. So that's testosterone.
Okay.
Progesterone for women. That helps balance estrogen excess. So people who have bad PMS, it's actually too low progesterone. So that helps with PMS symptoms. And also women that don't sleep well at night, that could be low progesterone too. So by replacing that, helps treat the PMS.
Okay.
Estrogen problems for women, if it's too high estrogen, and i.e. not enough progesterone, also bad PMS, fibrocystic disease, sometimes even endometriosis. And the low estrogen associated with Alzheimer's, poor concentration with women, osteoporosis. So by replacing the estrogen, you help treat all those.
Okay.
And then thyroid for men and women. We talked about the hair feeling sparse, feeling cold. If thyroid is low, people, their body temperature is low, their core body temperature is low, so they feel cold and their skin is very dry. With thyroid replacement, you help reverse all that. Nice supple skin. Also, estrogen is great. By the way, women, you know, very concerned about wrinkles. Estrogen helps with the wrinkles too.
Men and women?
Mostly for women.
Okay. Don't take the estrogen for the wrinkles.
Right. And then cortisol. There's a lot of fibromyalgia that's been diagnosed out there, and a lot of times that's from too low cortisol. So by replacing cortisol levels, cortisol is another hormone, that actually helps treat fibromyalgia.
Well, when you mention or think of hormones and growth hormones, certainly bodybuilders come to mind. What's happening with bodybuilders? I'm assuming they're overdoing it, or are they taking the right thing but too much, or they shouldn't be taking it all, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy using growth hormone, which is another hormone, which can be beneficial too. I view that really as very optional, because once everyone's optimized, very few patients, in my opinion, really need growth hormone.
So even bodybuilders shouldn't need it?
Well, they're doing it for competition. I mean, at that point, they're using very high doses, and it's purposely really pumping up the muscles. And
that's bad, side effect-wise? I mean,
it does increase the risk of some heart problems, joint problems, getting sore joints from too much growth hormone. So yeah, generally it's very controversial, and again, there's strict criteria. Growth hormone is different from all the other hormones we've talked about. With growth hormone, it is very strictly regulated, and for bodybuilders, it's really questionable about prescribing it.
Okay, but people get around that somehow? I mean,
they usually, if they want it, they can get around it somehow.
Are people abusing testosterone too?
Certainly, you know, if you look in the gyms, and especially if there's some women who look like, you know, they have the body of a man
Yeah.
and their voice is really low, that's a pretty good indication they're taking a little too much testosterone.
All right. Well, we'll try to lay off the testosterone. Okay. Well, this is Dr. Brian Boxer Wachler here today talking about anti-aging. Thank you very much for being here today, Dr.
It's a
Boxer
pleasure.
Wachler.
Pleasure.
My eyes are still great, by the way, after 5 years of vision correction, so I can still see you.
Fantastic.
See you next year for that. So, thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.